Good night, everyone. So I'm Cassie, and I'll be talking about some of the work I did this summer. Not by accident, by design, food access in California, which is where my internship was. So raise your hand if you know the difference between hunger and food insecurity. Okay. So hunger is defined as a feeling of discomfort or weakness caused by lack of food coupled with the desire to eat. This is hunger. Ribs poking out with too many missed meals and malnutrition. This is the type of hunger that we hear about all the time. Finish your food, there are children starving in Africa. I'm sure everyone has heard that statement. That's the thing about hunger. It's this abstract thing to many of us that we see on TV commercials asking us for donations, this thing that affects others in other parts of the world that we don't really have to worry about. Food insecurity is the state of being with limited to no access to fresh, healthy, nutritious, and affordable food. This is what food insecurity looks like. And this is what food insecurity looks like. People live in food deserts. Food deserts are places that instead of supermarkets and grocery stores, they have corner bodegas and no access to fresh or healthy food. They still have fast food restaurants and convenience stores instead. Food insecurity is complicated and it's multifaceted. It's complicated because it isn't just about not having food, it's about not having the right types of food. The food insecurity is instead of sending your children to school with packed lunch of fruits and vegetables, you send them with bags of potato chips and microwavable quesadillas that you can't even pronounce the ingredients on. Food insecurity is working 2 minimum wage jobs for 13 hours a day and bringing home cold Chick-fil-A for your kids because you don't have the energy to cook them an entire meal. You don't have the energy to grocery shop. And if you did have the energy to grocery shop, food insecurity is the closest grocery store being 30 minutes away by car and 2.5 hours away by bus, which is what most people use because they don't have access to cars. It's multifaceted because there were institutions set in place before our time that has led to the type of institutional food insecurity we see today. It isn't random, it doesn't happen by chance. There are predictable patterns to the people and communities that are most affected by food insecurity. Location, race, economic stability, and gender all play a role in affecting someone's access to food and how that food translates into their health. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how race in Oakland, California has historically been impacting people's food access. So, according to the USDA in 2013, 10% of white households were food insecure, 25% of black households were food insecure, and 24% of Hispanic households were food insecure. So that's 2013, and this has 2012 listed as the last year. So food insecurity went down for white households between 2012 and 2013, but it rose for both black and Hispanic households. In order to understand how and why food inequities in our food access persist, we must look at the historical context in which food access was determined in America and examine how this translates into food insecurity and health disparities. So does everyone know what redlining is? Yeah? Okay. So those who don't know, redlining is to refuse a loan or insurance to someone because they live in an area deemed to be a poor financial risk. So this is a map of Oakland in 1937, and this is replicated in Google Maps. And so what happened was, through New Deal policy by FDR, there was new home ownership mortgages. I'm sorry. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created as part of the New Deal, worked to redline places that were predominantly inhabited by people of color, and they were marked red because they were poor financial risk, so people of color weren't able to qualify for the loans that the Federal Homeowners Corporation was giving out. So racist, homeowners associations, banks, and construction companies worked to keep the areas that people of color lived in deemed as red. So they had to stay in the dilapidated city center after whites moved to the more affluent areas, to the hills, because the city center was being degraded by environmental hazards, and they were able to move out of the city and create these suburbs while people of color were kept out because only new homes built qualified for the loans. So people left the city, built new homes, and blacks were confined to the urban city center. Today, almost all of Oakland's people of color still live in the flatlands that we see marked in red. So here are where the people of color live, and those are the places marked red. And all the red dots are where white people live, and those are the places that got approved for loans. We see these types of racial inequities translate into more things like income. The same places in the hills and to the east have the highest incomes in Oakland, and the flatlands have the lowest. The difference between the median income in the flatlands and the hills is $35,000 a year. 98% of the people living in flatlands are people of color, but 48% of people living in the hills are people of color. This type of income inequality leads to one supermarket for 13,000 people in the hills, and one supermarket for every 99,000 people in the flatlands, which is a really, really big difference. Today, there is absolutely no supermarket in all of West Oakland. So how does this relate to what I did this summer? I worked at the Community Food and Justice Coalition, whose slogan is food for people, not for profit. And it's this really tiny nonprofit with 1 full-time staff member and 5 non-paid interns. But I had a really great time, and being so small, it meant that we sat on boards for a lot of larger initiatives because we're a coalition, we're part of larger coalitions. And I attended a lot of meetings for these initiatives this summer, and there were 2 types of initiatives that we're a part of that really stood out to me and kind of highlighted the differences and approaches to fighting food insecurity and the different ways that we can go about it. So the first initiative that we were part of was All In to End Hunger 2020. And this was a public-led initiative to end hunger in the Bay Area by 2020. Last year, Alameda County Supervisor Wilma Chen declared Lyndon Baines Johnson's war on poverty failed after 50 years. And Alameda County is the county that Oakland sits in. California has the highest rate of poverty in the country, and the Bay Area specifically has the highest rate of income inequality in the country, 2 times the national average. So they really wanted to attack hunger and poverty from a policy point of view, top to bottom kind of reform. And it was formal. We sat in big offices downtown around oak tables, and people were in suits, and they're all making lots and lots of money, and I was really intimidated by them. And when I was sitting in those meetings, I was really struck by the fact that myself and my site supervisor, Courtney Gonzalez, were the only people of color in the room. Everyone else around us, and she was making almost nothing, but everyone else around us was making a lot of money. And they were talking about how to end hunger for poor and minority people without ever having gone in those communities and talked to the people that they were trying to help. They had no idea what kind of issues the people they were really facing and how they felt about them and what their thoughts and ideas were about how to combat their own food insecurity. Instead, they were just talking in abstracts that it was even hard for me to follow. I mean, I was young, but I didn't understand where there was a disconnect for me. The other initiative that I was a part of was growing equity from the ground up, and this was bottom-up type of food policy, or food security reform. So it was a mixed public and private sector. So there was a lot of tiny nonprofits like my organization and Acta Non-Verba, which was this urban farm nonprofit. And there was professors from the University of California. There were ministers from the different churches around Oakland. And this was a type of coalition, like we were a part of, and they were working to develop an apprenticeship program for 20 youth in Oakland a year, that they would get trained over the course of a year how to urban farm. They would take courses in permaculture, they would learn about the social implications of food insecurity, the historical implications of food insecurity, and the idea was that after this year, they would go out into their communities and through their own empowerment, go back home and kind of like take the reins for themselves and combat food insecurity within their own communities. So the differences between GEGU and All In were stark, and while All In was a public initiative, up to the bottom, GEGU was a mixed initiative from the bottom up. The difference is, All In actually had a guaranteed sum of money that they were going to get to combat in the way that they wanted to. They were getting like a $5 million grant. They already had the money, and they were just thinking of the best ways to implement their strategy. GEGU has no money, none whatsoever. That's one of their biggest problems, is getting resources. But I still think that in the end, GEGU is a much better example of ways that communities and people should be thinking about combating food insecurity, because at the end of the day, change has to come from within the communities. And these are my wonderful fellow interns this summer.